Thank you, everyone.
Smiling.
We'll officially call the meeting to order. The meeting's been properly posted, the roll been taken.
Yes.
All right, number 2 is approval of the minutes. 2.1 are approval of the minutes from the August 5th, 2024 meeting.
Like to make a motion to approve the minutes? Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item 3, communications. On to item number 4 under business. 4.1 is review the concept plan step 2 of the planned infill development for the Delavan Public Library at 404 East Walworth Avenue. Jackie or staff owner?
Sure, I'd be happy to provide an overview. Is the applicant here?
Yep.
They are. Okay, I'll let them go ahead.
Guess we'll let the
No,
applicant-
she said,
Sorry.
she meant planning staff.
Would you like me to start?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. It's hard to read the room sometimes. Good evening, everyone. This is a concept review for the Delavan Public Library. You can see there's a fairly detailed submittal in your meeting packets. This project is going through the PID process with a planned infill development process. And because they will be requesting zoning flexibility, and also it is necessary in order to permit the library to expand. So this property is located within our business central zoning district. That district currently does not permit indoor institutional land uses, which the library is considered an institutional land use. And so that effectively means that the library is a legal and non-conforming use, which generally those types of uses are not permitted to expand. And so we're using the PID process to allow the city to consider an expansion of the library without being limited from expanding, and then also to consider certain zoning flexibilities. The property, as I mentioned, is zoned business central, as are other properties to the east and west and across the street with frontage on Walworth Avenue. The library is also adding additional parcels to the site to accommodate the expansion to the south. So those parcels to the south are zoned residential mixed 8 or RM8. The comprehensive plan actually envisions these parcels for future library expansion. And so this planned infill development would be consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. As you can see in the packet, they're proposing a substantial expansion, 1-story expansion to the south. That's largely consistent with the existing library building, and I'll let the applicant tell you more about the fund details in the project. But they're mostly keeping it to the within the same building setbacks of the original historic library building. They're also showing a relocated parking lot to the east of that expansion. Staff just noted a few items to point out to the Plan Commission. One is that there is a detailed landscaping plan in the packet. We'd like to see some additional screening, landscape screening, south of the parking lot to further screen that existing residential that'll be right next to that new parking lot. So they have a little more privacy and protection from headlights and noise related to the parking lot. Staff also notes that the parking lot is very tight. It does meet all of our minimum requirements for width and all those other performance standards that we have for parking lots, but it is quite tight. And so you'll see that there are truck turning radius diagrams in the packet showing pretty challenging radii for certain types of trucks. And so we would just recommend that any large trucks that are loading would do so from 4th Street rather than through that parking lot on the east entrance of the building expansion. Lastly, just wanted to point out that the parking lot includes 29 parking spaces, and there's also some on-street parking available, and the applicant is currently working with the adjacent property to provide for some off-site parking. I believe that's with the Family Dollar. So ensuring that although it is downtown, we don't have minimum parking requirements in this location, it will be important to provide some degree of parking for library users. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Jackie, any questions? Yeah, that's Kevin.
Jackie, at what point would we expect these residential property rezoning requests to take place in the process?
Sure. So that would happen at the next meeting at the GDP stage. So tentatively, we're looking at that occurring at the October meeting.
Okay. So if you looked at the total square footage of the building for this zoning standard, how many parking spaces would be required?
I don't have that at the tip of my fingers, but it would be pretty substantial. So it's basically a 32,000 square foot building. We would typically divide that by 300.
So 90.
So quite a bit more than, I believe, about 29 are being provided in the lot, plus additional on-street and potentially off-site.
How do we count parking in a downtown district with proximate lots? Proximate city-owned lots.
Well, I think in our downtown district, we have no minimum parking requirements, and so we don't count them at all. I think for this use, it is important to have some degree of parking. And so I would feel that any parking that we can find, whether it's through a agreement with adjacent property owners on city lots elsewhere in the area, although I'm not aware of that being proposed for this project, or on-street parking, I think we would count all of that as contributing to library parking. And again, the minimum requirements are 0 spaces.
So the grand total of available on-street parking, if this is developed the way it's proposed, is probably 10.
I would agree.
And you said the count is 29 in the lot, and even though the lot space requirements are adequate, the radiuses fail.
Could you say that last sentence?
The radiuses fail.
I'm not sure.
The turning radiuses, so for large vehicles. So if it was a normal central business district parking lot, the radiuses would fail because we assumed there were trucks that would move through that parking lot, right?
Right. They did truck turning radius diagrams based on a certain size truck. So that is very tight.
Yeah. Okay. Are we supposed to comment or question with you, Jackie, interior questions or not?
We tend to stay out from zoning. From a zoning standpoint, we tend to stay out of the floor plans other than to have an understanding of what's going on in the building. Sure. But I'm sure the applicant could answer if you're just curious about what the expansion is going to be used for, all of those types of things. I'm sure the applicant could speak to that.
So I have one question, which I think would fail at the zoning level that I want to clarify, right? So basically, this is 2 buildings in 1 shell. Because the top floor of A and B don't connect to the new construction and the basement of B in terms of use as it's outlined. And the top floor of A and B, those structures, which are the use floor of the library, the original library structures, are cut off now, if I read the plan correctly, from the new library structure by the elimination of the stairway, which is the old stairway from the entrance of the library to the use area, right? Have you reviewed the plan for access
I have
to
not.
the floor? Okay, so it would appear to me, and we don't have the whole plan set. It would appear to me that the primary access point becomes, excuse me, there isn't adequate ADA access provision for public use for the present use floors of the library. And I'm happy to get educated about it, but certainly doesn't seem to be any from the main access entrances to the new library extension. So I think it would be worthwhile for you guys to look at that. And there certainly appears to be no access from parking areas to that area.
Yeah, we can look at that.
Any other questions, comments for Jackie? The applicant, I think, in this case, Michelle, if you want to come to the podium. Share your thoughts and information.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm Michelle Carter. I'm the director of the library. And to answer your question, there is access to the 2nd floor of the library. So prior to my coming to Delavan, the plan was for the main floor of the library to become the Historical Society. And it is still my understanding that that is to be part of the plan. So because of that, and due to library staffing concerns and staffing concerns with the Historical Society and differing hours, the Historical Society will have the main floor of the library, so that would be the front entrance. There is a side entrance which will allow people to use the elevator to get to the 2nd floor. Primarily, it's my experience that the Historical Society has programs late Fridays and on Sundays when we're unsure if the library hours will mirror that. So it'll be operating as a second entity to the library.
To be clear, it's 1 building. We don't care who the entities are.
Well, the staffing,
No, I mean, it doesn't matter. So we make decisions based upon buildings and zonings, based upon present use, future use, not intended use.
the library main piece is all meant to be 1 floor.
I
And that-
understand that.
Okay.
That's not where my question lies.
Kevin, doesn't that suggest some zoning issues, however?
I don't know. That's why I asked Jackie to look at it, and Jackie identified that she hadn't looked at access yet. And I see where the elevator is on the in sheet A12, right? I don't see an accessible entrance at that grade level that gets people there easily. So I think there's work to be done, and beyond that, there's certainly work to be done from walkways and parks and stuff. I mean, parking and stuff like that. I mean, the good news is we're here for comments, not for approval or.
I think there's a sidewalk from the parking lot to that part of the building, and there's a separate entrance. I don't have the same document you have in front of me,
Well,
so
you live in it, so. I don't know where the door is to that basement level from the outside. It isn't indicated on the plan. There's a door portico on I guess it's on the west side, right? Is that what you're referencing?
I believe so without,
And when I'm looking at the basement plan as drawn on A12, I don't see where that door would appear to me to open into stairs.
there's stairs and an elevator
So it says
access.
stairs 165. So here, I'll show you. See, there's the portico to the door, and right next to the door is stairs. And so unless you expect that grade entrance, which leads to the elevator access, has the stairs eliminated, I don't know how we deal with it. And further, Jackie, there is no accessible parking that exists on the street there. Okay, that's 4th Street there. It's across the street from a convenience store. There's no access.
Well, since this is concept review, I think the best approach would be to just make sure we take another look at parking accessibility and then entrance accessibility and make sure that those are addressed.
So if we get back to the parking, so right now we have 29 spaces. How far would you expect the plan commission to, and recognize that this, to anybody who pays attention to the use of the building, and I live a block and a half away from it, and my family uses it all the time. We are one of a handful of walkers to that building. What would you expect an adequate parking count be? Because I think we need to give some direction to what the required parking count needs to be and its proximity. Because I know there have been efforts and discussion at other points in the city to identify what appropriate solutions are. But if I read the site plan correctly, there was an implication that the parking solution was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 parking spots designated for employee parking on a contiguous parcel. So that doesn't solve the problem for users.
Mm-hmm.
And now, we have an extensive lot across the street and, and I'm all in favor of people parking over there and walking across the street. Cause that's, I mean, we walk to that library all the time across the street, but I want to just make sure we understand completely what would make sense for the plan commission to look for when it comes to what's the total parking required to approve this thing.
Mhm. I mean, one thing we can do is look at the current parking lot and determine how much parking there is compared to the square footage of the current library. And maybe run some numbers that way to see, you know, if we want an equivalent number of spaces provided for the new building, that would be a good starting point.
Well, I mean, you know better than I, but I dropped books off there today and did a quick count.
25.
Yeah, so we got 25 on a third of the building. So there's your look.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So if you want to apply that ratio for 3 times, you know,
Well, so I mean, it would have gotten you to your 90 a different way. So I mean, I would think another piece of feedback I would have, I know there have been efforts to come up with an agreement on the contiguous lot, which is underused, to be able to provide more space. And I know that that agreement hasn't necessarily been favorably responded to. But given that this is gonna be a 100-year building, I would think that it would make sense to come to some kind of permanent discussion. Unless we wanna buy another residential house and double the parking availability. Because it makes no sense to have this plan and not have it have adequate parking. So, thank you, Roy.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Just for maybe a point of historical, perspective, when the addition, we say new addition, it's not very new since it was done in 1991, I believe, to the original portion built in 1908. What would the planning commission have maybe done or dealt with? Every scenario is a little different, but clearly I think with that addition that was built in 1991, an argument could have been made that we expanded the library. So I think, I don't want to speak for Kevin, but I think I understand where he's kind of going with this, is that expansion was done, and then one thing that we clearly kind of hear a lot of is that there's not enough parking now after that expansion to go to the footprint that we're currently in. So I don't know if anyone from staff wants to, just, not that we can't do anything differently, but
So
I always look to my historian here, Mark Wendorf. How would that have been approved maybe back then?
Well, the current library building is located in Business Central zoning district. So the old standard would have been, and it still is Business Central zoning district does not require any on-site parking. We did not require on-site parking for the treasury when they remodeled the old bank downtown, nor Box and Burlap. Those are all in the Business Central zoning district. And the library at that point was and is, the existing buildings in the Business Central zoning district. What we're looking at right now, I believe Jackie is doing this as a planned infill development, which is slightly different.
I just think I appreciate that historical perspective. Kevin, you were gonna say something?
yeah, what I was gonna say is, woo-hoo.
Yeah.
We skirted the rules and created a building that people can't use.
I just actually was making your point for you, if you actually heard what I said, which was, I'm not gonna speak for Kevin, but I think I know where Kevin's going with this, is that they allowed it, the expansion, and now we don't have enough parking, so I was actually agreeing with you.
Yeah, so I just think we have to resolve that as our input. And again, who knows, I mean, he may come back and say there's no solution, but.
Well, the solution may be just extremely expensive, because all of the solution. There's
Any other feedback that anyone wants to?
Question,
because that is just a long story.
Part of this plan is to request a change to zoning to institutional, is that correct?
The zoning would be, it would be a planned infill development, but we'd be basing it off of the institutional zoning district, yes.
I'm not sure I understand your answer. Are they,
When we do a planned infill development, it's basically a custom zoning district for that property. And so it is an institutional use, but it's basically a custom zoning district just for the library.
okay, well,
Why don't you-
second part. So it would be zoned institutional,
It would be zoned planned infill development.
okay? Is, what is the business status of the Delavan Historical Society? Are they,
Like, are they a nonprofit? Is that the
so
question?
it's like an LLC or a nonprofit, or it's not part of the city?
It's a nonprofit. but-
How do we fit that into the proposed zoning that's being
That's
considered?
great. Yeah, that's a good question. I think as part of a planned infill development, we have a fair amount of flexibility to accommodate multiple uses. So that I don't see zoning as a limitation to allowing the historical society to be located within the building.
Well, okay.
Yep, thank you. Any other comments? Feedback? Michelle, does it make sense to, on the part?
Oh, has anyone reviewed the signage yet? Because the pit will contain signage approval.
The question was, has anyone reviewed the signage?
Right.
Yes, I've done a preliminary review of that. They're proposing wall signs on the east and west side of the expansion building of the building. And then I believe there's a monument sign proposed as well. At this stage, we don't have enough detail to know precisely if that it meets our code requirements. So the applicant will need to provide that information to us so we can review that.
So I would just say that it would, I think it behoove us to make sure they knew the standards before they asked us for a variance.
At this point, I'm not aware that they're looking for any variance for signage. Do you know something I don't?
Well, I was just looking at the amount of square footage of the raised letters and whether, I don't know whether they appeared backlit or not, and whether or not the monument sign was lit. All
Mhm.
that stuff.
We can look into that.
And then we don't have it, so this is still signage. There's in the plan, physical structure on the outside, like shade structure and stuff like that. Do we deal with that as a sign item or as a pit lot item?
Typically, we would treat that as an accessory structure, not a sign.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Kevin. What I was gonna ask you, Michelle, was, on the point of additional landscape screening, around the new parking, do you foresee that being an issue, or obviously?
No,
There's
I don't-
talk about that.
we have talked about that. screening the residents, I think it's to the, let me get my bearings. The residents to the south, that it would be quite close to our parking lot. And I think the architects had an idea of putting some kind of timber, like fencing there that would kind of give them some privacy and shield them, you know, from the parking lot activity.
Any other questions, comments, feedback?
It's a lot since I've seen anything about this building. That's just a single story addition, correct?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, staff. Thank you, applicant, for providing some additional information on the project. Any other comments, questions? We'll move on to item number 5, which is the zoning administrator's report. Memo report. Any questions? Do you want
If you have any questions, I can come up here, Lise.
Yeah, I have a question for you. You were speaking about the need to abandon a private well at 1625, I think it was.
This would have been at the 2525 East Geneva Street, so this would
Yeah,
have,
pulled that up. Google. That's an empty, it appears to be an empty field.
so it's the property that's pretty much straight across from Lake Lawn, where they have there's a big white barn on it, and then there's
Oh,
two
okay, so
smaller
it
parcels.
pulled up the wrong. Cause
Yeah.
it's an empty field back where, I think on the Myers property on Google, I thought.
Yeah, you're in the wrong
There'd
spot,
be a well up in the middle of that.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, and Lake Lawn is aware of that, and they're in the process. I think Mark might know a little bit more on the process of where they're at with that, but they are aware and they are working towards that.
T, what was the questions on that parking lot for the church over in Walnut?
Yeah, so the church parking lot that was approved through the Common Council, the person that installed that parking lot did not follow the approved plans. And they kind of had the general concept, but they did not follow them specifically. So we had some issues with how it was completed. And so we were working with them to get it as close as we can to the approved plans. Staff and also working with Jackie, we've made some minor tweaks to it, but it's pretty much sticking to the same plan, but they had to remove a bunch of concrete because the person that installed it, I don't think he had his plan with him when he did the work.
Had nothing to do with the curbing supposed to be in there.
They did put curbing in there, but there were certain areas that didn't have curbing that they're going to have to put in before we sign off on it.
Okay, that was my question. Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks, Tate.
Okay.
So, T on 2525, you identified that there was a deadline to abandon. What was the deadline?
And that one,
It was from July and they've been given an extension.
Until?
Remember? I'll have to go back and look.
And then on 314 East Walworth, it said contact has been made about the signage. If I recall, the last time you reported, it becomes, they lost their 120 days or whatever, right?
correct.
So are they being cited?
So I have talked with that owner, and he doesn't own the building, he rents, which I know doesn't matter according to the code, but he is going to end up making a new sign, and he is getting back to me within the next week or two here. I haven't issued any citations with him to him yet, because he's been compliant with us with trying to make this happen.
So he was non-compliant for 120 days, waiting for 120 days to happen.
Correct.
So I don't understand why you define it.
Well, I mean, the only thing, I could make him take it down. And if he takes that down, then he's gonna have a sign behind it.
No,
That's not gonna,
you can cite him too, you can fine him.
right,
And there's nothing that creates urgency among a small business owner as a fine, right?
correct.
I'm concerned that if he's putting up a new sign and it doesn't meet compliance, that he's gonna look to try and extend that for another 120 days. If that's the case, I don't believe that it's appropriate for us to start that process over. It should still be based off the initial.
Right, so from talking with him, the new sign that he's planning on putting up will pretty much be what he has up there now, but it will not be lit. So it won't violate any of if the sign was to be lit, it would violate our code section in the downtown historical district. So he has been responsive with me, and he knows that it's an important issue. And if he's, I don't know, I can report back next month. I mean, it's one of those things that, technically by our code, I could issue him a daily citation, but this is also one of those things where he's not gonna get it done in 2 days. So usually.
But T.
Yeah.
He's had multiple months since you noticed it.
Right,
So it's like Barney Fife putting his foot down saying, I'm serious now. So it's not like it's not like you made him know that he had a problem, right?
Right.
According to what you've reported previously to us.
right, he knew that when he put it up that it was a temporary sign.
No, thank you.
The other piece associated with that is there's a limitation as far as certain products to be utilized downtown. And a particular sign, if he's planning on putting up a similar one, we still need to make sure that he's meeting those requirements.
Yeah, and we did check on that. He is below that 20, I believe it's 20%, and he is below that.
I find it interesting that the sign itself is advertising for product and he has over 25 or 20% of his business is linked to that particular sign.
All I can tell you is that the products that are on the shelf is less than 25% of that, so.
Any other questions? Karen, updates?
Can you talk about the Baymont and what the issues were lately? The comic store place moved out because of unsafe conditions?
Right, so over at the Baymont, they have some plumbing piping that's above the comic book store, that was having some leaking issues. So we did contact that landlord, and currently, that part of the building is shut down until they fix it. They did hire a plumber to fix that issue, but I don't think it's 100% resolved. I think they thought they resolved it, but they were still having some issues, and they still need to clean it up properly. So they have not been reopened by the city yet on that side.
On that side.
Correct.
Do you have a permit there's no permit in the window on the other side, and the guys are putting cases in.
Putting cases in,
For
yes,
the convenience store.
right, we do have some permits on that. I don't know if they might not have put it in the window, but they definitely have, I believe, an occupancy permit, and I believe that everything else, there was no plumbing or anything like that in there.
Questions? Was thanks Steve for the update. Yes. Further business, entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion and a second, all in favor of adjournment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.